On RTE1 now, we've repeated yesterday's proceedings in the Oireachtas, presented by Damien Tiernan.
Hello and welcome to Oireachtas Report. Crime and measures to combat it following the murder of journalist Veronica Guerin dominated proceedings in the Dáil. First, the House passed a bill which restricts the right to silence of a person suspected of being involved in drug trafficking. Then deputies debated a joint private members' motion on crime, tabled by Fianna Fáil and the Progressive Democrats. The motion resolved that the recent murders of Veronica Guerin and Detective Garda Jerry McCabe represent a defining moment in the battle against organised crime. A further measure introduced by Fianna Fáil to confiscate illicit assets was then debated. We begin with a report on the motion tabled by Fianna Fáil and the Progressive Democrats. Deputy Liz O'Donnell of the PDs told the House that the recent murders of Miss Guerin and Garda McCabe showed it was clear that the criminal justice system needed to be reformed, and she criticised the government.
They have accepted the Fianna Fáil Members' Bill on illicit assets. They have promised a constitutional reform of bail. They will spectacularly and with great media aplomb later this evening launch their proposals at government buildings. They will wrap around them in glory the measures which they so recently dismissed with contempt. The fact is that unless this government was forced and unless the opposition had the public with us pressing for these reforms, nothing would have been done.
The subject of bail was just one of the subjects which Deputy Liz O'Donnell dealt with in her speech.
There are now people saying that to change the law of bail will infringe civil liberties and that we shouldn't be hastily bringing through changes. In my view, there has been a need for constitutional reform of the law of bail since the early 70s. The Supreme Court decision in the O'Callaghan case has been called a liberal bridgehead. I believe it was a liberal bridgehead too far, in that, in effect, it guarantees that any person arrested and accused of a serious offence will be set at liberty pending his trial, unless, as a matter of probability, there is evidence to suggest that he will either not turn up for trial or that he will interfere with the proper conduct of the trial by interfering with witnesses. Even if there is evidence, as a matter of probability, that the accused will commit crimes while on bail, there is that guarantee. That is a ludicrous guarantee which is only available in this jurisdiction. It is not available in any other common law country.
The Fianna Fáil leader, Bertie Ahern, spoke about the issue of rights.
And the most basic civil liberties issue is the right to life and bodily integrity, to one's personal possessions and to one's personal freedom. The arguments for the unrestricted right to silence of an accused or the preservation of antiquated bail laws are academic by comparison. I believe, Count Coyle, that this House has the power and the ability to push back the wave of crime. The question we must decide is whether we will exercise that power and that ability. And for as long as we are prepared to tolerate criminals retaining the proceeds of their wrongdoing, it will be evident that crime pays. People with vast and unexplained wealth, who consider themselves to be untouchable, to date have in effect been untouchable. Our detection services have not been able to fully penetrate this web of criminal activity and cut it in the bud for a whole variety of reasons. But there is no reason in logic or in law why this should be allowed to continue.
In relation to the number of government deputies who are present for the debate, the Fianna Fáil leader had this to say.
I don't often criticise ministers or minister states for being about their business. But I do feel aggrieved that on a night where I spent practically all my weekend on this issue and talking to ministers and ministers of states and asking my colleagues to come back from the country and have late night meetings on Sunday and go through motions and change motions, that at the very time that I, as the leader of the biggest party in this country, was about to stand up, along with the leader of the Progressive Democrats and their spokesperson, the government take off to a press conference. If they really want our cooperation on crime, or do they really want just to beat us on a propaganda war on who gets the headline tomorrow? Well, I'm just interested in trying to do something about crime, and I'm glad that there's a considerable amount of deputies in the opposition But I'm sure the public, or at least for the record if the public don't notice, that they will see that one member of the entire government parties, all three parties, one member has bothered to come in to listen to what the opposition are saying and doing.
In response, the Minister of State at the Department of Justice, Joan Burton, spoke of the differences between Fianna Fáil and the PDs.
I have to say I'm glad that Deputy Ahern in his contribution made a balanced contribution, because to listen to Deputy O'Donnell's intemperate and badly thought out contribution at the very beginning, which completely lacked a sense of balance as to what actually causes crime in our society, I thought was in fact to do a disservice to those people who suffer from crime and to those people who inflict crime, in particular on their own communities. Perhaps it is that the view of crime is different from Dublin 4 and Dublin 6 to what it is in deprived areas. But unless in this debate we address not just crime but the causes of crime, we have to look in a balanced way, and we cannot have a situation where on the one hand the PDs would introduce more and more legislation in relation to crime, about much of which there is common agreement, and on the other hand, in relation to their economic policies, would savage the heart out of public expenditure in this country in relation to areas like social welfare, health and education. If people who are poor have crime in their midst, what I am saying to Deputy O'Donnell is that she must address the consequences in social terms of the economic policies being put forward by the Progressive Democrats.
The bill, which restricts the right to silence of a person suspected of being involved in drug trafficking, was passed by the Dáil. The Criminal Justice Drug Trafficking Bill also allows suspects to be detained for up to 7 days, and for senior Gardaí to issue their own search warrants. In the report stage debate, the Minister for Justice assured the House that this long detention period is needed to deal with drug smuggling. Michael Conway reports.
My objective, and it has been my objective since introducing this legislation for 7-day detention, was to ensure that we had sufficient, seriously penal powers available to deal with the serious criminals in our midst, and all the while making sure that they were guided by the best of protection for people when in custody in our jurisdiction. And I believe that, despite what I'm reading, etc., I believe that this measure and the amendment I'm making here is a further careful wording of an amendment. I believe the measure of 7-day detention with its safeguards built in is one that is extremely appropriate to the climate we're living in and into the type of crimes that we're dealing with today.
The Minister then had to attend a cabinet meeting, so she left Minister of State Austin Curry to reply on her behalf. His rejection of a Progressive Democrat amendment seeking the videotaping of Garda interviews brought a sharp response from one of his own colleagues, Alan Shatter.
I want to say, sir, in addressing this particular issue, where I'm coming from, because there's an issue and a response from the Minister that I'm not satisfied with. I start off, sir, from a position in which I believe the drugs scourge is the greatest danger facing young people in this country. I'm not satisfied, sir, that the government to date has dealt with these issues comprehensively or satisfactorily.